Hello again. Hi. Welcome back. Hello.
Hey, Christine. Morning or afternoon.
Good afternoon, Salima. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I see Lena is here and I'm trying to get her in the chat. So I invited her. So yeah, how is your Friday going?
I'm grateful it's Friday and not Monday. That's all
Lena.
I'm gonna.
Okay, Lena is here.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I see Lena is here.
Hi.
And I'm trying to get her in the chat.
Are you hearing
I
us?
love you here. Yeah, how is your Friday going?
I'm grateful it's Friday and not Monday. That's all I'm gonna.
Lena is here.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I see. Hi, everybody. So I think this video is lagging a bit. I don't know if you're also experiencing that.
I'm not.
Okay. So welcome, Lena.
Hi. I'm just trying to figure out this, make sure I'm doing this right.
You are doing it right. Once you're here, you're in the right spot. You don't have to worry. Yeah. So we're really grateful for you being here, being our guests. And last week we had a similar conversation, and this is all in observance of International Safe Abortion Day on September 28th. So last week we had a conversation specifically around the legislation surrounding abortion in Guyana. And today we want to get a little bit more specific in terms of getting access to the service. So, Lena, I know you're very experienced in the field. You've been in Guyana for so long. You've been doing this work. And I remember when I moved to Guyana and I was trying to get involved, everybody would always say, "You need to talk to Lena. You need to talk to Lena." So I'm so glad that we're actually friends. And even when Salim and I were talking, every time we like came to a point, we're like, we need to ask Sherlina this. Sherlina would know.
Okay, no pressure.
No pressure at all. So, but before we start, just for anybody that's new here, I'm Christine Samaru, and I'm the founder of the Breadfruit Collective, and I'm gonna allow Lena and Salima to briefly introduce themselves.
Okay. My name is Sherlina Nageer, and I'm a member of Tammuke Feminists. So it's a small collective here in Guyana for intersectional feminist action. And so we have partnered with Breadfruit Collective, as Christine said, to just raise awareness and knowledge around abortion rights in Guyana.
Okay, and I'm Sherlina Nageer, otherwise known as Lena Free, and I am an ecofeminist, activist at large. I do consulting with a few organizations. One that I have been mostly closely affiliated with over the years is the Red Thread, which is a grassroots women's rights organization, as well as GRPA and several others. So happy to be here.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to be here. I know you have a lot happening too, and we'll talk about that at the end. But yes, last week we talked a lot about the legislation itself, and a lot of persons, we had a post on the myths and facts, and a lot of persons, both inside and outside of Guyana, were surprised about the fact that we have this piece of legislation that's so forward thinking, that's actually um, available. However, persons, regular Guyanese may not be aware of it, and also access as a whole is something that we need a lot more awareness on. So I guess maybe Salima, you can jump in and just like maybe give us like a little bit overview of the legislation itself, and then we'll start talking about access.
Yeah, so as you said, we had a discussion last week on the legislation, and something I like to point out, it's one of the more liberal pieces of legislation for the Caribbean and South American region, that allows persons wide access to termination of pregnancy services. So the legislation allows you to have access to an abortion beyond the first trimester, a decision that, with consultation with two doctors. And there are a number of reasons that women can give to have an abortion, whether it's failure of contraceptives, economic reasons, that it may affect your mental well-being or your physical health. Women, by the law, legally, they have a right to request those services. But then we had also discussed about access, and that the law doesn't always match access. And so the Termination of Pregnancy Act was passed in 1995. So it's been 26 years since we've had this. Women have had the legal right to seek abortions. But over those years, we still have faced a number of challenges. Women are having unsafe abortion. And so we kind of wanted to talk a bit more today on, what is safe abortion? Why is it so important? And what does it mean specifically for Guyanese women? And so to just jump right in, I wanted just to have like a bit of background information on what was happening in 1995. So before the passage of the Termination of Pregnancy Act, like first of all, why were women activists pushing for this in 1995? What were women experiencing before 1995?
Right. So, so just to say, I was not in Guyana at that time. So what I am telling you is what I've read about and gotten from talking to people who were on the ground. But basically, in the 90s, septic abortion and incomplete abortions were very, very high. So, of course, the fact that it was illegal didn't stop Guyanese women from attempting to perform it. And so, because it was not readily available, especially in the public sector, there were a lot of septic and incomplete abortions. So, a quarter of all the blood at public hospital, GPHC, was used for treating abortion-related complications. And septic abortion was the third highest cause per admission. So it was, and deaths from septic abortion were also very high. It was a high contributor to maternal mortality. And those were the reasons that kind of galvanized the fight to make this legal in the early 90s. It took a while. It took a while before it got to legislation point, but that was really what was going on. A lot of women were dying and being seriously injured, and the fact is that a lot of these women, when they died or they were in hospital or sick at home for a long time, it affected the whole family because a lot of them already had children, right? So these were some of the ways that women in Guyana were suffering before the legislation was passed.
And I know it's like in the legislation, they specified that it was because of health concerns. And then when they passed it, it was not really along party lines, but more so like a vote of conscience. So the health aspect was being pushed forward. So from 1995, and then after the pass, we talked about previous, but after the pass in the act itself, was there like a reduction in unsafe abortion practices?
Right. So the law passed in 1995. One interesting thing is before the law passed, 6 months before, and then 6 months after, they did some research and they found a 41% drop in admissions to the hospital for septic and incomplete. So that was really huge. And they also found, they saw a 35% drop in the blood transmissions that was used for abortion related complications. So that makes a case, again, for when it's illegal, it's being done safer. So there are fewer complications, fewer infections, and, reasons for women needing more care. So I mean, I do want to say though that these numbers, they only tell, a really small part of the story, because, a lot of the abortions before 1995 and even after up to now, there's still, a lot of secrecy and very poor data collection. It has been available in the private sector as well as the public sphere now. And so, again, data is not really collected well in the public domain. Sometimes the data that we have doesn't include what's happening in the private hospitals. It doesn't show what's happening for people in the hinterland, people who are trying to do self-managed abortions as well. So, take the data with a grain of salt, but it does show a clear drop in hospitalizations for septic and incomplete abortions, and a clear drop in blood transfusions being required. So, yeah.
You raised a point about self-managed abortions. I think if we can touch on that more, because despite the legislation passed in 1995, a lot of people, even myself recently, thought that abortions were only legal up to a certain time. And I've had healthcare providers tell me you could only have an abortion up to 12 weeks. After that, you can't, which is obviously incorrect. And I've had friends who only recently found out it was legal. And, people that I've known who may ask about abortions or try to access it, the usual route was either a private doctor, which not everyone can afford, or they will go to the pharmacy and the pharmacist will prescribe something. So could you just kind of, talk about that a bit more? What does that mean for women? I know not everybody has the option to go to Georgetown Public Hospital, because if you come in from deep Rupununi, you really can't just jump and come to Georgetown. But what does it mean for women in terms of self-managing an abortion? How do we ensure women can do that safely? Because there's this balance between access, how do we ensure safety, and all these concerns, especially for rural and indigenous women.
Right. I mean, that is that is a huge issue, and it's great that we have this law, right? It's super progressive on paper, but that's the thing that where we fall down a lot of the times is in the actual implementation and the enforcement of the law, right? So even though it's 26 years that we've had this law making abortion illegal, for all these majority a lot of reasons, including mental health, including economic reasons. So it's very progressive. People don't need consent of partners, but like you say, Selima, in the rural and in the hinterland regions in particular, abortion is still not available in the public domain. So in some ways, not a lot has changed, even though we have, right? It's still an economic issue. It's a class issue, right? For people who can afford to travel to Georgetown or who can afford to pay a private doctor, they're fine. But for people who can't, right, they're still stuck trying to figure out what to do, how to do, and information also, right? Where do you call, right? Say if you have some people, a lot of people in the hinterland don't have internet access, right? So we talk about telemedicine. We talk about, all the information is there online. If you don't have internet access, that doesn't help you. If you don't know, if it's legal, but you don't know where to call, that doesn't, it's like almost as good as not having a law in the first place, right? So what's happening is that, there are traditional medicine things that people have used, some of which, do not work. And, I would not recommend, but there are things that people have used for for a very long time, right? So yes, we want to say that, you know, as much as possible, women should try to get to a trained medical provider, so a doctor. But also in 2016, this is important to note that the act was amended to allow mid-level providers, so nurses, midwives, medics, pharmacists, now have legal protection, so they can also um, do abortion, medication abortion. We're using the pill, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So they also are allowed to do that as long as they are supervised by a doctor and they notify a doctor. So that is an option. But again, people have to know about this, right? The nurses, the medics, they have to know that they can legally do this. A lot of them still don't, right? And then the people that need abortions, they have to know that they can ask these people who are not doctors, but who may be in their communities, like a medics or a nurse or a pharmacist, so they can go and ask them for help. But, you know, in terms of other kind of safe abortions, self-managed abortions, you know, if you don't have a number, I would say, you know, try to call. GRPA is still the place I refer a lot of people to. And that's, again, a Responsible Parenthood Association. I will say the number so people who are watching, if they need it, they can call. So their phone number is 592-225-4743. Should give you into the clinic, and you can find out more. But yeah, the self-managed thing, you know, I want to say like a little bit of history. Like in America, back before abortion was legal there, women organized themselves into collectives and did thousands of abortions themselves. Something called the Jane Collective in Chicago. This was in 1973. And so, you know, one of the myths about abortion is that it's very dangerous and it's unsafe. It's actually, when it's done by somebody who knows what they're doing, it's actually very safe. It's actually safer than completing a pregnancy and giving birth. So, again, to say, you know, there can be complications, and we are not recommending that people who have choices self-manage their own abortions. But if you don't have options, you know, it's still something that women have been doing themselves or with the help of other women's elders in the community, people who know about, you know, traditional medicine. That's the majority of abortions over time have actually been outside medical setting, if you really think about it. So
I'm glad you raised that point, because I mean, this might be a little side, but I feel there's this sense that only doctors, I mean, yes, we want doctors and trained persons to manage these things, but sometimes I feel part of it is also saying that women don't understand their bodies and cannot take care of their bodies. And so some of that sometimes I think filters down into the care that women receive. So even the advice that they get from medical providers, sometimes it can be really condescending. And I know this is something that needs to be addressed, like, you know, and, you know, part of the legislation talks about pre-abortion counseling. And unfortunately, some healthcare providers use this as an opportunity to question or interrogate, I should say, a person's choices and try to dissuade them from having that service, and thinking, you know, they know what's better for you in terms of your body and your choices, right? So just for anybody listening, if as if you're going out there and trying to access an abortion, the nurse or the doctor doesn't have the legal right to tell you you can't have it. They have the obligation to give you your options and tell you how to care for yourself after the abortion, but they don't have the right to say you cannot have it, or it's, you know, sometimes people give misinformation. So just keeping that in mind, that you have the right to informed care from any medical provider here. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great that you brought that up because women, we do know our bodies, and I think there is a lot of wisdom in traditional practices. And I guess that information, it can be skewed, and it can be seen as traditional in a negative sense. But women, like you mentioned, women they have been conducting this kind of procedure for years, and a lot of it is done in secrecy, and it's within the family, and it's kind of hush hush, but it's being done. So there's still a lot of wisdom there. So what are some of the services that are available in Guyana in terms of seeking abortion, in terms
Right.
of the medical procedures?
Right. So there are two kinds of abortion. I'm sorry, there was a little bit of a lag. Um, right. So there are two main kinds of abortion procedures. One called medical and one called surgical. So the surgical abortion is actually, there's no cutting, right? So it's not actually surgery. So I don't like that's incorrect phrasing, but that is when they use vacuum aspiration to clear the uterus, right? So that's the one where it's available up to 16 weeks or after 16 weeks of pregnancy. So the medical abortion, that refers to the ones using tablets, right? Using a pill. And that is most effective in the earlier stages of the pregnancy, so less than 8 weeks. Of course, a lot of women don't know that they're pregnant until after. But those are the two kinds: the pill method, which is the medical abortion, or the surgical abortion, which is vacuum aspiration. And both of those are available, and for as many weeks along as three doctors just have to agree that if the continues the pregnancy, that it would cause permanent harm to her, or that it's necessary to save her life. So those are the two types of abortion that are available in Guyana right now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know, Salima, you touched on this a bit about the pre-counseling and after counseling as well. But what kind of service should a person expect to get when they're seeking an abortion, in addition to the counseling?
Right. So they're supposed to be counseled before as well as after. I have never, I've never seen anyone get the post-abortion counseling. And the pre-counseling, a lot of times, is really just talking about contraceptive options, and maybe other stuff that comes up, but it's kind of cursory, you know. But yeah, that's and a lot of times it can be kind of coercive, as well. I've heard of doctors telling women who've gone for more than one abortion that they have to take the IUD, or they have to start using some contraceptives, or else they're not going to do another abortion for them, which is also illegal, right? The law doesn't put a limit on the number of abortions that anybody can have. So the counseling, I've just heard of it being very not client-centered, very coercive, and very judgmental. Of course, that's not all the time, but that's just what I've heard a lot of it being. But I do think, the just talking about it, like the after, again, it's very safe if it's done by a trained somebody, and so a lot of times people that have an abortion don't need a lot of special care physically. They can continue with their activities after maybe just 24, 48 hours. They can go back to work, they can continue doing pretty much everything that they were doing before they had the abortion. Sometimes some people might need to talk about it some more, or process, in terms of, mental health, psychologically, depending on where they were at in the decision making, or, what factors influence them in deciding to have an abortion. So the post counseling might be something that some people need more of.
Yeah.
And that's
And
I
that's
don't think
something
it's as
that,
real.
as you talk about the post-abortion consent, I feel if we could just touch on that a bit, because there's this myth that women shouldn't have access to abortion because, after the abortion, they're going to become depressed and suicidal, and they're going to hate their choices for the rest of their lives. Like, I've known people who have had an abortion and they're okay. Whatever stress is going on in their life has nothing to do with that seeking a medical procedure, but just living everyday life in Guyana and trying to make ends meet. These are the things that make you stressed out. So I think this is something we need, have a little more conversation about, because a lot of times people think that if you restrict access, you're going to fix certain, or they imagine issues that need to be fixed by restricting access. Could you talk a little bit more about, that myth about abortions creating mental illness, and this is why we need to not have abortions?
Right. This is a really huge issue because the problem is not the abortion, right? The problem is the circumstances in the woman's life um, that that lead to the unplanned pregnancy or the unwanted pregnancy, or the timing is not right for whatever reason. It could be economic, it could be all kinds of reasons. And when we only focus on the fact of the abortion, we are not addressing all um, these other things that might be going on. So it's there has been other research that shows that um, when you address the other issues, there is no real correlation between having had an abortion and poor mental health, depression. Like, just on the surface, those two things, there's no correlation. The only correlation is if there is a lot of stigma, right? So if the person seeking the abortion um, is very judged. She feels like she can't talk about it. People are telling her that she's a bad person, she's gonna go to hell, like she's a sinner. Like, those things are what cause the person to have a mental health issue, not having had the abortion, right? So it's great that we're having these conversations. This is part of destigmatizing the issue, because, like you said, Salima, it is very, very common, right? The abortions, 1 in 3 women will have at least one abortion during their reproductive lifetimes, right? So it's pretty common, and not just an abortion. A lot of women have more than one abortion during their reproductive lives too, right? And so we just need to normalize it more. It's part of life. It's part of our lives as women. It's healthcare. It's just healthcare, like anything else, like getting any other service. And it's just there's just so much judgment, which doesn't help the situation at all.
Imagine if we wake up tomorrow and suddenly extracting a tooth is, stigmatized or it's considered immoral. And so you have this rotten tooth in your mouth, and it's like, no, you shouldn't pull it out. It's part of your body. You came into the world with it. You need to leave. It's like if you put it in that perspective, it makes no sense. It's a medical procedure that people need to access for various needs. So yeah, it's a medical procedure. If we start looking at it like that, I think we'll reduce the idea of it as a moral issue, rather than a health issue.
Yeah. And I think our society is they're so quick to judge without
And
listening and
it's because
understanding. Go ahead, Lena. Yeah, I was saying that in our society here, it's just so quick to judge and pass our own opinions without knowing circumstances. And in terms of the myths, there are so many. It ranges, right? It could come from, okay, well, if you're having an abortion, you're not going to be able to have children after that, and you're going to regret that. But
yeah,
from
it's
hearing
because
other people talk, we have had people that had kids, had an abortion, had kids. It's situational, and it's not up to us to make that decision on a person's body.
yes, definitely. because society is patriarchal, and there's this sentiment that if you have a womb, you have to use it, and there's something wrong with you if you don't procreate. And so yeah, I wish we would talk about abortion in those terms, and not just focus on the woman or the girl who is bad, or misbehaving in some way from getting an abortion. Like, let's flip it. Let's talk about why more people are not using contraceptives. Let's talk about the partners that don't want their partners to use contraception, right? Or who try to tell them what to do with their lives and their bodies. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that, women just have this, we're conditioned to think that we have to bear children. And, the judgment against other women who decide to not have children, or to
I think we're losing Lena.
She should pop on back if her internet stabilizes.
to put it's a notch in the belt for a man or a woman to have many partners. But
you're back.
If a woman or girl
we lost you for a minute,
sexually active and enjoys sex and have partners, it froze.
Yes, but thank you so much, Lena. And I think we're coming down to the end. But what are some other major myths that you've heard? I know you've been working in this space for a really long time. Definitely, we want to have these conversations for people to become aware, people to have the conversation with other people, and for just, like understanding these myths and speaking truth to it.
Right. I think we've touched on a lot of them. That it's people think it's dangerous. It's not. Some people say it's mostly a young people's issue, and that if you talk about it, you're going to be encouraging young people. Well, that's just silly, because if talking about something encouraged it, then there's a lot of talk about abstinence. They're still having sex, right? So, and if you look at data, actually, it shows from after the law was passed, only 14% of the abortions that were done in 1996 were for adolescents. And 82% of the people that got abortions in 1996 were already mothers with multiple children. And that's still the case right now. So it's not only young people, it's all kinds of people that have abortions. There's a myth that it's bad women only. Religious women get abortions, queer people get abortions, right? So there are people that want to be pregnant, that want children, and also need an abortion. So there are lots and lots of reasons why people need abortions, and we just need to stop assuming that we know and why people are seeking the service, and we can stop judging people. It's really not helpful at all. But yeah.
Lima, do you have any other questions or comments?
Not at this point, but just to, remind persons, as we keep discussing here, that it's legal in Guyana. It's a medical procedure. It's not a moral issue. You have a right to have access to termination of pregnancy in Guyana. You can talk to a qualified medical personnel, which can be a nurse, a medics, a doctor. And, you have two types of abortions mainly used, which are the medical abortions, or the, not using that term, but in terms of the manual vacuum procedure. And that I think we really need to continue these conversations and let people know what's going on, that it's okay. A lot of people have it. It's not just one kind of person that has an abortion. And people have so many reasons, but they don't need to justify it to anyone. It's their choice at the end of the day.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. And I know earlier Lena shared a number for GRPA, and I'll just repeat it 225-4743. And I think this is going to be definitely an ongoing conversation between the Breadfruit Collective and Tammuke, because it's something that we've seen needs to be done. Like, we need to continuously have conversation, bring people in and hear their perspective. Before we end though, any announcements from any of you?
Well, from on Tamake's end, we are having a pop-up shop
So
tomorrow. So
Okay.
for everyone that, if you know anyone or if you have a job interview coming up or you're starting a new work role and you need something to wear, you can just check us out tomorrow at Phoenix, Guyana, which is in Kitty, Queen Street. And everything is for free. So please keep back on that information. Tomorrow we're having a pop-up shop.
Thank you so much, Salima. That sounds amazing. And Lena?
yeah, just gonna mention a couple events. So there's a film festival going on in Guyana right now, the Timeri Film Festival, which shows Guyanese and Caribbean films. There's some cool movies, so if you are a film buff, you could check that out, timerifilmfestival.com. And I've also just started a group focused on environmental activism. So lots of intersectional ways of reaching people, and that's called the Green Heart Movement. And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. So definitely the Tamari Film Festival sounds amazing. There's so much plan, and Green Heart Movement. If you haven't already, follow them on Instagram and keep up. We are going to continue having these conversations in observance of the day, International Safe Abortion Day on September 28th. And the next thing we have planned is a regional conversation, and that conversation hopefully will be through Zoom. And you'll hear a lot more about that through our Instagram pages. If you're joining us today live, or if you're going to be watching this live later on, thank you so much. And definitely, we have to continue this conversation. And I just want to say thank you both for taking time out of your busy, busy Friday to speak. I really appreciate both of you and all the work that you're involved in.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks for
Bye,
everything.
everybody.
Bye.
Take care.